Episode 1. The Locked Cellar of Blackwood Manor. Blackwood Manor stood ominously on a gloomy hill outside Boston, an old yet imposing Victorian structure shrouded by ancient oak trees. Sarah and David, a young and hopeful couple, bought it at a bargain price, ignoring the circulating whispers about the house's bloody history. In 1920, the father of the Blackwood family murdered his wife and 2 daughters before vanishing. The only remaining mystery was the cellar beneath the ground floor, locked tight by a massive, rusty padlock that no one could pick or break. From the very first night, a penetrating cold seeped into every corner, despite the roaring fireplace. Sarah began hearing faint whispers, like children calling for their mother from a distance. David, a staunch rationalist, initially dismissed it, attributing the sounds to wind whistling through the old cracks. But then, the events escalated. One evening, as they were having dinner, a scratching sound began to echo.
It wasn't the sound of a rodent, but a sharp metallic scraping on wood, coming from directly beneath their feet. The sound was prolonged and rhythmic, like a desperate attempt to break free. They went to the cellar door. The lock was still there, rigid and icy cold. When David pressed his ear against the thick wooden door, he heard a chilling noise, the heavy, labored breathing of someone trapped inside. The nightmare peaked on the 7th night of their stay. A sudden winter storm hit, cutting off power and all communication with the outside world. At midnight, as they huddled in bed, a distinct, soul-shattering click echoed through the house, like a death knell. Sarah and David stared at each other, faces pale. They knew what it was. They, trembling, went downstairs. The dim light from their flashlight illuminated the cellar door. The rusty padlock, which even professional locksmiths couldn't tackle, was wide open. It lay on the floor, cold and inert, as if unlocked from the inside. Taking a deep breath, David slowly pushed the cellar door open. A putrid, moldy, and bone-chilling gust of air rushed up at them. The cellar was pitch black, with the flashlight only illuminating the slick stone walls. Sarah and David descended, each step a struggle against their survival instinct. At the far end of the cellar, they found what they feared. Not a corpse or a treasure. It was an antique wooden crib, gently rocking in the darkness despite the lack of wind. As the flashlight beam hit the crib, a raspy, distorted voice, gender indiscernible, echoed from the corner. "You are not allowed to be happy here." Then, phenomena occurred rapidly. The whispers intensified into maddening screams. They saw fleeting images. The shadow of a man in a hat standing still. 2 little girls leaning against the wall, their faces obscured. And most terrifyingly, David's own reflection in a broken mirror on the wall had blood-red eyes, staring intensely at Sarah. David, in a moment of panic, grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her to run. But just then, the figure of the old Blackwood father materialized right in front of them. Not a hazy ghost, but a physical entity, with eyes blazing with madness. He reached out, his gaunt fingers brushing David's arm. At the same instant, David heard a whisper right in his ear, in his own voice. "Kill them. Kill them to keep this house for us." The cellar door slammed shut, once again, with a dreadful bang. Sarah and David scrambled up the stairs, slammed the ground floor door, and ran out into the storm. They looked back at the house. An oil lamp inside the cellar suddenly flickered through the small ground-level window. Simultaneously, they heard the sound of children giggling, joyful and utterly terrifying. They knew they had awakened something. More importantly, they had left the cellar lock inside.
They were spared, but the door was now permanently open, welcoming the silent shadows forevermore. Will they dare to return for their belongings? What souls are truly trapped in the cellar? And can David escape the haunting whisper that is now echoing in his mind? Episode 2. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Route 66. The legendary Route 66, once a symbol of freedom, is now a desolate, forgotten highway in Arizona, swallowed by the darkness and endless stretches of sand. Bob is a long-haul trucker, a hardened man who believes in nothing but diesel and strong coffee. In the dead of night, his truck's headlights illuminate a lone figure standing on the roadside, hundreds of miles from the nearest town. It was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, wearing a thin white dress, unsuitable for the desert cold, her long black hair obscuring most of her face. Though his experience told him not to stop on such isolated roads, Bob's conscience urged him to pull over. The girl climbed into the truck, silent and avoiding Bob's gaze. He asked her where she needed to go. Her voice was faint, almost a sigh, managing only the name of a long-abandoned ghost town. Auburn, please. Bob knew Auburn was a crumbling, uninhabited settlement deep in the desert, but he agreed to take her. As soon as the girl sat in the passenger seat, an immediate penetrating cold spread through the cabin, forcing Bob to turn the heater up to maximum. For the long drive, the girl said nothing, only staring out the window into the infinite night. Bob tried to strike up a conversation, talking about life on the road, but the girl responded only with icy silence. Bob's unease gradually turned into fear when he noticed something strange. The girl cast no shadow and did not react when streetlights swept past. Then he noticed a cold, wet patch on his leather seat. He asked the girl if she was okay, but she only shook her head slightly. When they finally reached Auburn, the ghost town was nothing but ruined frames and rusted signs under the moonlight. Bob turned to tell the girl they had arrived, but the passenger seat was empty. The truck door was still closed. There was no way the girl could have jumped out of the moving truck. Bob slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. The girl had vanished without a trace. However, she had left something behind. On the cold leather seat lay an old silver amulet, intricately carved with the image of a car plunging off a cliff. Haunted, Bob drove to the next rest stop and began searching for information about Auburn and this particular road. He found a yellowed, old newspaper clipping. 20 years ago, a young woman named Mary had died in a horrific car accident, exactly where Bob picked her up on Route 66. She had been fleeing an attacker, was pushed from the car, and run over. The most chilling revelation was not the ghost. Bob looked closely at the silver amulet he had found. He recognized it as a unique, handmade keychain he had given to his own father, a retired trucker who had lived in the area and had an unverified record of unsolved assaults. Mary's spirit had hitched a ride with Bob, not for a lift, but to deliver a crucial piece of evidence. The silver keychain belonged to the man who caused her death. Bob sits in the truck cabin, the dim light from the dashboard illuminating his terrified face. He clutches the amulet. Now he understands why the girl was silent and why she was so cold. She was not a typical phantom hitchhiker. She was an agent of vengeance, and by accepting the keychain, Bob had inadvertently become entangled in her case. He looks into the rearview mirror, and under the pale moonlight, the faint outline of the girl in the white dress is standing right by the roadside. She is no longer silent. Her black eyes stare straight into his, and her lips form one single chilling word: Daddy. Bob starts the truck and speeds away from Auburn in panic, but the faint sound of the word Daddy and the cold presence of the amulet will forever haunt him on every mile of Route 66 to come. Episode 3: The Devil's Polaroid Camera. Ethan was a talented but struggling photography student in New York City. He was constantly searching for unique angles, desperate to create a piece of work that would define his career. One afternoon, while browsing a shabby antique store on the Lower East Side, he found an old, boxy Polaroid camera. It was vintage, had no clear markings, and was sold for a pittance. There was something about the camera's unsettling coldness that drew him in. Ethan started using it. At first, everything seemed normal, but as he began taking test shots in his tiny apartment, photos of an empty room, a corner of the wall, or his old armchair, the bizarre occurrences began. Every developed photo contained an unwelcome guest. In the first photo of the armchair, a gaunt, skeletal hand rested on the armrest. In a shot of the room's corner, a tall, inky black silhouette stood right behind him, though he was clearly alone. These figures were always blurry and distorted, but undeniably present. Ethan initially thought this was a unique light anomaly, or a technical effect created by the antique camera. He took the photos to class and began displaying them, garnering significant attention. Everyone was amazed by the camera's apparent ability to capture ghosts. The fascination with the camera quickly turned into a nightmare. One night, Ethan took a photo of his best friend Maria at a bar. When the picture developed, the image of Maria had a large, circular red mark over her chest. Hours later, Maria unexpectedly suffered a seizure and was rushed to the hospital with a massive, inexplicable heart attack. Terrified, Ethan tried to dispose of the camera, but whether he threw it into a public trash can or left it behind at a subway station, the camera always found its way back to his apartment, sometimes appearing on his desk as if it had never left. Realizing its malevolent power, Ethan decided to stop taking photos. But the camera began to take on a life of its own. It would automatically make the whirring sound of preparing to shoot when Ethan wasn't holding it. And worse, these shots seemed to target the people Ethan cared about. The climax occurred when he was talking to his respected professor via video call. The camera sat on the table, untouched, but suddenly vibrated and emitted the click of a picture being taken. Minutes later, Ethan received a text message that his professor had suffered a severe fall down the stairs in an accident. Completely desperate, Ethan locked himself in his apartment. He covered the camera with duct tape and a towel, stuffed it into a tin box, and tried to pray, but he knew it was futile. Lying in bed, trembling in the dark, Ethan heard the familiar whirring sound of the photo developing process, emanating from inside the tin box. He knew there was no way to stop it. He opened the box. The camera had automatically taken a picture. Ethan picked up the photo as it slowly came into focus. He saw no one else in the shot. It was a close-up picture of his own face, his eyes wide with horror, but there was one terrifying difference. His eyes in the photo were X'd out with 2 crimson blood streaks, and a sinister, knowing smirk replaced his terrified expression. The photo finished developing. Ethan felt a terrible chill run down his spine, as if something invisible had just entered him. He turned to the mirror. His reflection was smiling with the X'd out red eyes. The camera hadn't just photographed him. It had replaced him with the ghostly image it created. Ethan was now trapped, becoming the unwelcome guest in his own life. Who is taking Ethan's picture? And can Ethan escape the camera that has turned him into a ghost in his own flesh? Episode 4: The Bells of the Louisiana Bayou. Dr. Alistair Finch was a folklorist from the University of New Orleans, fascinated by the tales of voodoo, magic, and ancient curses deep within the Louisiana Bayou. Armed with a professional recorder and a blind faith in science, Alistair visited a small, isolated community living near an area known as the Bride's Swamp. The locals, Creole speakers with watchful eyes warned Alistair about their most terrifying legend, the bride's bells. The legend said that centuries ago a small chapel was completely submerged during a great storm, right on a wedding day. The bride drowned along with all the guests, but the church bell remained intact. Sometimes, on nights with no full moon, a clear, haunting bell sound would chime from beneath the water. It was not a sign of a wedding, but a death knell announcing the imminent demise of the listener. Alistair, believing it was merely underwater vibrations or bird calls, decided to set up his recording equipment by the water's edge, right where the submerged chapel was rumored to be. He waited for several nights, recording frogs, insects, and occasionally the groan of an alligator. On the fourth night, as a thick fog settled over the bayou, he lay in his tent reviewing the recordings. Around 3 a.m. he heard it, a beautiful yet terrifying sound. A church bell chimed, clear, resonant, and so close it felt as if it were hanging right above his tent. There was no wind, no storm, just the lone bell echoing across the swamp. Alistair hurriedly turned on his recorder and rushed outside, his flashlight sweeping across the black water. Nothing, just fog and water. Yet the bell continued to toll. Alistair tried to trace the source of the sound, following the bayou's edge. As he got closer, the bell seemed to become more frantic and urgent, as if summoning him. Finally, he found it. The upper half of an old stone cross jutting out of the water. Just beneath it was where the chapel sank. In that moment, the bell stopped abruptly. A heavy silence descended. Alistair felt a dreadful coldness envelop him. He rushed back to his tent to check the recording. As he played it back, Alistair realized something horrifying. The bell wasn't the only sound he had captured. Interspersed between the bong, bong sounds was a voice, a woman's voice, distorted by water, calling a name. At first he couldn't make it out. He cleaned up the segment and played it again. The voice was slow, drawn out, and chilling, calling his name. Alistair. Alistair. Alistair instantly understood the meaning of the bride's bells. It didn't just foretell death. It called the next victim by name. He frantically packed his gear, determined to escape the bayou before sunrise. Alistair speeds through the forest, trying to drive his old truck off the muddy track. He hears the bell begin to toll again, no longer from the bayou, but from right behind him, from the woods. Alistair glances into the rearview mirror. Between the trees, he sees a faint white figure, seemingly a woman in a tattered wedding dress, standing there. She isn't moving, but the bell is chiming from her very being, urging Alistair to return. Alistair's truck gets stuck in the mud. He revs the engine desperately, but to no avail. The bell has consumed everything. He closes his eyes. In his final moment, Alistair hears the rushing sound of water and the bride's voice, now right outside the car window, whispering, "You are mine now. The bell has tolled for you." The truck slowly sinks into the darkness and the mud, leaving behind only the echoing chime of the bell, preparing to call the next victim's name. Will Alistair become a part of the bayou's folklore? And whose name will the bell call next, now that it has harvested Alistair? Episode 5. The Lost Composer's Final Symphony. Elias Thorne was a gifted but struggling pianist in Chicago, haunted by the genius of Julian Vance, a prodigious composer who mysteriously vanished from his mansion in the 1950s. Vance was known for his emotionally intense works, which always carried an air of darkness and madness. During an estate auction, Elias purchased Vance's old grand piano. Inspecting the interior, he discovered a hidden parchment scroll. It was an unfinished manuscript, just a few final notes away from completion, which Vance had titled Requiem for a Lost Soul. Elias began to play the music. From the very first notes, a profound coldness and sorrow spread through his apartment. The music possessed a supernatural power, not just captivating, but almost compelling the listener to sink into despair. As Elias practiced and neared the end of the composition, strange phenomena began to occur. Faint moans emanated from the corners of the room. Shady figures flitted across his peripheral vision. More frighteningly, Elias began to have visions of Julian Vance's final moments. The composer sitting before the piano, his face contorted in sheer terror, his hands seemingly forced down onto the keys by an invisible force. Elias realized this music was not a requiem for the dead, but a symphony composed of madness and agony, and it was seeking to possess its player. The music's power began to control Elias. He couldn't stop playing. When he tried to get up from the bench, he felt a strong physical pressure on his shoulders, forcing him to sit back down. His fingers, despite his attempts to resist, continued to glide over the keys, repeating Vance's passages. The more he played, the more exhausted and starved he became, yet his will weakened. Elias's girlfriend, Clara, noticed the change. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale, and he barely spoke, only reacting when she tried to stop him from playing. Once, when Clara attempted to close the piano lid, an invisible force shoved her away, and a loud crash, like a growl, came from the instrument. In utter desperation, Elias researched Julian Vance. He discovered that Vance hadn't committed suicide or vanished. He had been consumed by his own work. Vance had made a dark pact for musical greatness, and the price was his soul being eternally bound to the unfinished requiem. Elias, completely exhausted and barely conscious, sat before the piano. Only a few final notes remained. He knew that completing the music meant completing his own sacrifice. He heard Vance's voice, faint but menacing, whispering through the music, "Finish it, and greatness will be yours, forever." Elias attempted to use his last remaining strength to smash the keys, but at that moment, the form of Julian Vance materialized, standing right behind him. Vance placed his gaunt fingers over Elias's hands, guiding him to play the final notes. Not a ghost, but an entity fighting to take over his body. As Elias played the last note of the requiem, a cold blue light flared from the grand piano. Elias's soul was sucked into the keys, vanishing entirely. Clara burst into the apartment, finding only the empty piano and the now complete manuscript. But when she looked closely, she saw something horrifying. It was not Elias Thorne's name signed below the completed requiem, but the name of an unnamed pianist, etched just beneath Julian Vance's name. Weeks later, another aspiring young pianist finds the perfectly complete and beautiful manuscript, mysteriously forgotten, and takes it home to play. The cycle of haunting begins anew, and the piano awaits the next soul to continue its symphony of suffering. Who will be the next victim of the requiem? And can Elias ever escape his eternal bondage to Julian Vance and the cursed piano? Episode 6. The Mirror Ghost of the Old Hollywood Hotel. The Montecito Hotel, a faded relic of Hollywood's golden age, stood silently on Sunset Boulevard. The hotel was famous not only for hosting movie legends, but also for room 404, where the beautiful young actress Veronica Vance, unrelated to Julian Vance from episode 5, mysteriously took her own life in 1947 after her career collapsed. Elena Reyes is a renowned paranormal investigator specializing in mirror haunting phenomena. She rented room 404, determined to capture evidence of Veronica's spirit, who was allegedly still confined by her bitterness and vanity. Room 404 was small and stuffy, but the centerpiece was a large antique mirror with a peeling gold-plated frame. It was said that Veronica had spent hours staring into this mirror before her death. As soon as Elena entered the room, she felt a chilling sense of being watched. She set up her cameras and temperature sensors. On the first night, the infrared cameras captured unusual light fluctuations in the mirror, like ripples on water. Elena heard faint, sorrowful sighs, and occasionally the sound of the closet door opening and closing on its own. By the second night, the phenomena became clearer. Elena looked into the mirror. She saw her reflection, but in the mirror, room 404 seemed to be in a different state, hazier, dustier, and in the corner, an old film camera was running. The most chilling part was that sometimes her reflection in the mirror did not follow her movements. When Elena blinked, the reflection in the mirror stayed open. Elena realized something horrific. Veronica was not just confined in the mirror. She was trying to swap places with the viewer. The climax occurred on the third night. At 3 a.m., Elena stood before the mirror, attempting to communicate. She asked Veronica what she wanted. Immediately, Elena's reflection in the mirror began to distort. The hair of mirror Elena became curlier. Her clothes transformed into a vintage evening gown. She was no longer Elena, but Veronica. Veronica in the mirror started to smile, a wide, strained, smug grin filled with glee. She spoke in a whispery yet icy voice. "The price of fame is eternity. Now it's your turn to play my part." Then, Veronica in the mirror reached out her hand, not touching the glass, but as if reaching through an invisible doorway. Veronica's skin in the reflection turned pale and cold, and her eyes were filled with a desperate madness. Elena panicked and backed away, but she felt a powerful, irresistible pull. Her hand accidentally touched the mirror's surface. Instantly, the room temperature plummeted. Elena was violently yanked forward, slamming her face against the cold glass. She felt herself passing through a thick, viscous liquid. When Elena woke up, she found herself inside the mirror. The reflective room around her was now a trapped world, devoid of color, existing only in muted shades of gray and perpetual stillness. She saw herself, or rather, Veronica wearing Elena's body, standing on the other side of the mirror, smiling triumphantly. Veronica, in Elena's body, placed her hand on the mirror from the outside and whispered, "Turns out you're a terrible actress. You'll always be just a reflection." Elena frantically pounded on the mirror from the inside, but no sound could penetrate. She was just an image, trapped in the eternal loop of vanity and despair. The door to room 404 opened. The unsuspecting hotel manager walked in for a check. He saw Elena, Veronica, admiring herself in the mirror and smiling contentedly. He smiled back and closed the door. The final shot is Elena, trapped, watching the real world through the mirror like a helpless spectator, while Veronica, in her body, begins her new life in Hollywood. Can Elena escape the reflected world and reclaim her body? Or will Veronica continue to lure other victims to sustain her existence? Episode 7. The Truth Behind Unity Town's Harvest Festival. David, Chloe, and Sam are 3 young friends from the city looking for a quiet camping spot to escape the rush of modern life. They stop near Unity, a secluded rural town in the American Midwest, famous for its annual Harvest Festival, an event advertised as a celebration of the cycle of life and Mother Earth's bounty. As soon as they entered Unity, the three friends felt a strange atmosphere. The townspeople, with their unnervingly wide smiles, were overly friendly, inviting them to join the festival activities. All over the town, giant straw effigies were erected, some human-shaped, others grotesque, adorned with old relics. Chloe, who was detail-oriented, noticed that the town seemed to be stuck in time. There was poor mobile service and internet connectivity. The residents dressed in old-fashioned styles and spoke of ancient rites with alarming solemnity. On their first night camping, Sam began to hear faint chanting echoing from the town, accompanied by frantic drumming. He crept closer to the town and saw the residents dancing around the largest, towering straw effigy, which had an empty wooden cage suspended over its chest. Their eyes were fanatical and worshipful. David, a history buff, found an abandoned old church. Inside, he discovered a rotting journal, written in the handwriting of a resident from the 1800s. The journal did not document good harvests, but instead described a series of annual disappearances. Each year, a community member would be chosen to ensure the survival of the others, a sacrifice to their cursed land. The true nature of the harvest festival was not to give thanks for the crops, but to harvest a person. The three friends realized they had to leave immediately, but when they returned to their campsite, their tents and car were surrounded by the Unity residents. Their friendly faces were gone, replaced by cold and determined expressions. The town elder, an old woman with deep-set black eyes, stepped forward. She smiled and said in a calm voice, "You arrived just in time. The land has been underfed for a while. We couldn't let you leave with such fresh energy." The three friends tried to fight, but they were quickly overpowered. They were dragged back to the town's main square, where the harvest festival was underway. David, Chloe, and Sam were tied up and placed near the giant straw effigy. The elder pointed at them and declared, "The cycle is complete. Mother Earth has chosen. Let the new harvest festival begin." However, instead of choosing all three, the elder only selected Sam. Sam was placed into the wooden cage, suspended over the effigy's chest. Chloe and David were forced to watch as the townspeople, to the beat of frantic drums and chilling chants, began to set the giant straw effigy on fire. As the flames erupted, Sam screamed desperately. The most terrifying part was that when the effigy burned down, Sam vanished, leaving no trace of bones or ashes, as if he had been entirely absorbed by the fire. Afterward, the Unity residents released Chloe and David, their faces returning to their unnervingly friendly composure. "You are free to go," the elder said. "The land is pleased now, at least until the next festival." Chloe and David fled Unity, but they carried with them the haunting image of Sam consumed by the flames, and the chilling gratitude that they were not the ones harvested. They knew the next harvest festival was coming, and they could never go back. Can Chloe and David warn the world about Unity? Or will they be forced to keep the secret to protect their lives? And is Sam truly dead? Or has his spirit become part of the very evil dormant beneath Unity's soil? Episode 8, The 00 Emergency Room. Clara Jensen is a tired night shift nurse at St. Jude's Hospital in Chicago, an aging medical facility with long corridors and a convoluted layout. Clara is dedicated, but the night shifts are starting to take a toll on her psyche. One night, while checking a floor plan for an old supply cabinet, Clara noticed an emergency room she had never seen before. It was located at the end of a forgotten side hallway on the ground floor, with no sign, only a heavy metal door numbered Room 00. Though curious, her workload made her ignore it. But precisely at midnight, an irresistible compulsion drew her to that door. Exactly at 00, Clara opened the door. Inside, it was an empty yet utterly cold emergency room. On the gurney, under the flickering fluorescent light, lay a patient. As Clara approached, her heart stopped in terror. It was herself. Room Clara was lying on the bed with a terrible injury. The first time, it was a severe burn on her arm. Clara panicked, slammed the door shut, and fled, trying to convince herself it was just a hallucination from lack of sleep. But the next day, while making coffee, a hot cup suddenly spilled onto her arm. The burn perfectly matched the injury she saw on her doppelganger in room 000. The events kept repeating. The second night, Clara went back to room 00. This time, room Clara had a deep, bruised wound on her head. The next morning, Clara slipped on the hospital stairs and hit her head, thankfully sustaining only a mild bruise. But the terror of the coincidence was unbearable. Clara realized that this room was not an illusion. It was a physical premonition of her impending death, and her biological clock was counting down. She tried to find information about room 000 in the hospital records, but it did not exist. She asked other nurses and doctors, but they all said that hallway ended at a storage room. Clara decided she had to destroy or seal the room. She returned to room 00 at 11:59 p.m. She brought a hammer and a crowbar to try to break the lock and door. At exactly 00, the door automatically swung open. Room Clara was lying there, in the worst condition yet, bloody, eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, and an empty syringe stuck in her arm. This was a fatal overdose. Clara knew her fate was sealed, and she only had hours left. Clara frantically tried to smash the room's walls with the hammer, but the room's material seemed non-physical. Her blows left no mark. Just then, room Clara on the gurney sat up. Not a ghost, but a distorted, sickening version of herself, with empty eyes and a cold body. It reached out for the real Clara, speaking in a raspy whisper. "Why try to stop it? You belong to me. Your death keeps this place running." Clara ran. She sprinted down the hallway, trying to find help. But the hospital was eerily silent. As she reached her supply cabinet to grab a sedative, she saw the empty syringe lying on the tray. It was the exact syringe she saw stuck in her doppelganger's arm. Clara realized she wouldn't die by accident. She would self-destruct under the room's influence. She tried to throw the syringe away, but an invisible force gripped her hand, compelling her to hold it tight. In despair, Clara looked at the clock. It was 0:05, just 5 minutes past midnight, and things were already starting to happen. She looked into a glass panel and saw her face had turned pale, her eyes hollow, identical to the doppelganger on the bed. Clara collapsed to the floor. She knew she was trapped in the loop of room 00, where she was forced to reenact her own death to feed some malevolent entity lurking in the old hospital. Can Clara resist the evil will controlling her? Or will she become one of the countless anonymous victims who died in this hospital, forced by room 000 to relive their final moments? Episode 9. The Curse of the Nomad's Music Box. Arthur Finch, a wealthy but lonely collector in San Francisco, constantly sought one-of-a-kind artifacts. At a clandestine flea market, he acquired a small, intricately carved music box made of ebony wood. The seller, an old, ragged man, uttered only one sentence: "It brings good fortune, but not for everyone." Arthur dismissed the warning. He took the box home, wound it up, and listened to the melody. It was a classic tune, delicate yet strangely haunting. Immediately afterward, luck began to favor Arthur. A long-held stock suddenly soared in value, and a seemingly failed real estate deal unexpectedly succeeded. His life changed in a matter of weeks, but concurrently, terrible and inexplicable misfortunes struck the people around Arthur. His regular coffee shop waitress suffered a horrific car accident right after he paid her with his massive winnings. His friendly neighbor, who always helped him out, suddenly lost his job and went bankrupt for no clear reason. Most horribly, his beloved young niece, who had just visited him and admired the music box, contracted a rare, rapidly debilitating illness. Arthur, initially thinking it was coincidence, realized the terrifying truth. The more he played the music box, the greater his luck became, and the heavier the misfortune of those closest to him. The music box was absorbing the fortune, health, and even the souls of others to enrich Arthur. The music box's melody was not mere sound, it was a macabre tune of appropriation. Arthur tried to distance himself from the box. He locked it in a safe, but that night he was awakened by a faint tune. The music box had wound itself up and was playing, despite being locked away. The melody seeped through the metal walls, echoing in Arthur's mind, creating an intense craving for wealth and supreme selfishness. He felt a powerful urge to open the safe, to touch the box, to be rich and safe, regardless of the cost to others. Arthur understood he had to destroy it. He took the music box to a junkyard, placed it on a steel block, and swung a sledgehammer down. But just before the hammer hit the box, an invisible burst of energy shot out, stunning Arthur and sending him reeling backward. The music box remained intact, and the melody began to play, louder and clearer than ever, as if mocking him. Arthur, defeated and desperate, brought the box back. He sat alone in his luxurious apartment, the music box on the table. The tune played constantly, relentlessly. He realized he had become the box's next nomad. The box would not let him be. It would force him to move, to interact with new people, so it could continue to harvest energy and sustain its life. And in return, Arthur was allowed to live in cursed opulence. In a fit of madness, Arthur caught his reflection in the window. He was wearing tattered, filthy clothes, identical to the man who had sold him the box. The curse had transformed him, turning him into a vagrant bound by the box's evil wealth. He reached out and wound the box one last time, not because he wanted to, but because he was compelled. The music played. Arthur broke into a wide, possessive, and wicked smile. No longer himself, he had become the box's keeper. The next morning, the music box and Arthur were gone from the apartment. The box had found its new manager, and the new manager was ready to hit the road to seek out the next victims. The malevolent tune continued, from town to town, from person to person. Will the music box continue its search for a new player? And will the box one day return for the original man who sold it to Arthur? Episode 10. The Trapped Rooftop of the Skyline Tower. Alex is a tired night security guard at the Skyline Tower, the newest and tallest skyscraper in downtown Seattle. His job is to patrol the floors, check doors, and monitor cameras. For such a modern building, it should be sterile and devoid of mystery. However, there was one anomaly. The elevator never reached the rooftop. On the elevator panel, the button for the 100th floor was disabled, perpetually dark. Weeks into his shift, Alex started hearing strange noises, heavy footsteps, muffled arguments, and occasionally the sound of breaking glass, all emanating from the rooftop area, which, according to records, contained only mechanical equipment. When he checked the surveillance feed, all cameras on the 100th floor showed static or a black screen. One night at 2 a.m., the city experienced a sudden rare grid failure. All elevators ceased operation, and the dim emergency lights came on, shrouding the building in an eerie, static darkness. Alex, following emergency protocol, was forced to check all floors, and he decided he had to take the stairs to the rooftop to check the auxiliary power unit. The climb up 100 flights of stairs was a grueling challenge. As Alex ascended, the air grew progressively colder. On the higher floors, from 90 onwards, he began hearing whispers, not from one person, but from multiple voices, pleading, regretful, and angry. Finally, he reached the heavy door leading to the rooftop. The door, which should have been unlocked, was bolted shut. Alex used his emergency key. When the door swung open, Alex stepped through. He did not step onto a standard mechanical rooftop. Although he was standing on the pinnacle of the most modern building, he found himself in a distorted, chaotic version of a rooftop. There was no machinery. Instead, it was a vast, windy outdoor space with strangely warped railings and dried bloodstains on the concrete. Worse, Alex saw the trapped shadows. These souls were the people who had jumped or fallen from the building during construction or after its opening. They were not hazy ghosts, but three-dimensional, solid-looking figures, stuck in a loop of their final moments. A man repeatedly climbing over a railing. A woman arguing with an invisible phone before leaping. Their screams were distorted and repeated endlessly. Alex realized this rooftop was not a physical floor. It was a cursed purgatory for ruined souls. When Alex tried to return to the stairwell, the door had vanished. He was trapped. The trapped shadows began to notice him. They didn't attack, but they sought help. They tried to pull him into their loop, wanting him to witness their pain. A man with a fractured face approached Alex, reaching out his hand, his voice wailing. "You have seen us. You must stay here. You have already fallen." Alex frantically ran to the edge of the roof. He could not find an exit. He looked down at the glittering city of Seattle below and suddenly realized the skyline tower was too high, too arrogant. It had attracted death. Alex found a small metal door, appearing to be an emergency escape hatch. He opened it and crawled inside. He found himself in a tight, dark space. He crawled out and realized he was back on floor 99. The elevator was still dark. Alex raced down the stairs, not daring to look back. By the time he reached the ground floor, the power flickered back on. The elevators hummed to life. Alex rushed out, abandoning his post. He ran, but the terror followed him. The next morning, Alex read the newspaper. An architectural firm had unveiled plans for a new skyscraper, much taller than the skyline tower, named Cloud Level. Alex knew the trapped rooftop wouldn't stop at the skyline tower. It would move to the top of the next tallest building, seeking new souls. Alex is sitting huddled in his apartment. His phone rings. It's the building manager, asking why he abandoned his shift. Alex replies in a trembling voice, "The rooftop. It's not for the living." As Alex hangs up, he glances out his window. He lives on the 20th floor. Reflected in the glass is the image of the skyline tower. But on the 100th floor, a dim light is flickering, and Alex could swear he hears the faint sound of breaking glass, followed by the silent wail of a trapped soul awaiting its next victim. The series concludes with the chilling realization that mysteries and horror are never truly destroyed. They only relocate, waiting for new places or new people.